Got a rainy, windy day outside, so not suitable for getting in and doing some beekeeping. So we're here in the boardroom. This is the room where we gather around and make decisions and talk about design and so on. So welcome, and if you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll get to answering those. Trace will read those questions out and we can answer them live. Also, let us know where you're tuning in from in the world. It's really interesting to us to know whereabouts you are. So this is our Flow Hive 2 Plus, which you probably know about if you're on the list, but if you're new, this is our latest release, which has a few upgrades. So down here you can see the ant guards, which just help stop ants getting onto your hive. However, it's you do need to remove the foliage from around your hive, or they'll use that as a bridge to get on. This one actually has a little bit of oil in it already from a previous show and tell, and that just provides a liquid barrier for the ants, making it hard for them to cross over. And you can set the height of the cap. If you've got big ants, you'll need to set it a little bit higher, or they might just step right across this area. But for the little ones, you can have it nice and low. Then we've got the solid aluminium legs here, which are just a bit more sturdy. We've upsized the bolt here and moved it towards the corner, which adds more stability. And the whole thing's solid cast aluminium. And moving up the hive, we've also got an upgrade here with the tray. So we've gone for 100% recycled polypropylene now, instead of the acrylic ones, which are stronger, more robust, and just all around a bit better. If you've got questions, put them in the comments below and we'll get straight into it. And questions about the Flow Hive Plus, the Flow Hive 2 Plus, or just beekeeping questions in general. We'll get to answering those. This is a really interesting selection of honey. I was noticing that one's got a two-tone, and that could happen when you've harvested part of a frame and then they refill it with another type of honey, and then you harvest and you get a two-tone coming out. So look at that beautiful light colour on top of the darker one. It's just amazing looking at all the properties of the honey, but that also means that the density of the honey is different when they layer like that, where you've got a more dense honey below and a less dense one on top. And the flavours will be different too as you go down through your jar. That's a beautiful light one that we've harvested. It's one of the things that is amazing and was unexpected in the development of the Flow Hive, was to be able to isolate the flavours frame by frame and really enjoy that process of sharing the flavours of honey.
Fantastic. Cedar got someone called Morgan, and they're on their boat in Moreton Bay in the pouring rain watching Facebook Live. How good is that?
That's so good.
Look, we've got a question from Shannon. Just wondering, lives in Australia and coming into winter. Just wondering about preparing your hive for winter in the colder months.
Okay, so if you live in the southern areas of Australia, or you're in the northern parts of the northern hemisphere, you're going to get some cold winters. Here we don't have to worry about it too much because we're in a subtropical region and we can actually harvest honey all year round. We can leave the hive in this configuration all year. But those places that have a long cold winter do need to do some preparation. And there's different schools of thoughts on it, and how cold and how long your winters are will also affect your strategy. But the number one thing is you're trying to get that long cold winter time. And that means they need enough stores to do that. And the best information you'll get is from your local beekeepers as to how much honey you'll need to leave them in order to survive the winter. If they don't have much honey, then you may need to feed them to build up some stores in order to use that to survive through the winter, because bees use honey to warm themselves, to stay alive through that winter time. They disconnect their vibrate, and that way they can keep, even in the harshest of colds where there's snow up to here, they can keep themselves warm enough to survive. So enough honey is the number one. And if you want some instructions on how to make a quick feeder, we've got instructions in a video somewhere on our Facebook and YouTube channel. I think it's called Making a Quick and Dirty Feeder. And you can use this area under the lid to feed your bees should you need to build up some stores for the long cold winter. Again, find out from your local beekeepers whether you really need to build up stores, but this is an area where you can put a feeder. You can buy a round top feeder which fits good enough under the lid, or you can make your own using jars, and the video we made suggests. The next thing to think about is the queen excluder. Now, the bee ball in the winter in those cold regions will form inside the hive and keep themselves warm, and as they consume the remaining honey in the hive, they will move usually upwards. So they'll be clustering down here to start with, and they'll move upwards. Now, if you've got an excluder, which is this grid here, which is designed to limit the queen from getting up and laying in your honey collection areas, that will also limit the queen from moving with the ball of bees up through the hive, and your queen could be left behind and perish underneath the excluder. So to mitigate that, you can take the excluder out, and that'll allow the ball of bees to move up through the hive. Now, the next question is how big to leave your hive during the winter. Box off and storing it in a nice cold place over winter, so that if there is honey in there, it doesn't go off. You'd be keeping it away from vermin. If you've got a chest freezer, you could put the frames in there over winter and put them back in the springtime. Or you could make sure they're dry and have no honey in them to store them over winter. So it's up to you what strategy. Beekeepers will try all sorts of different the flow super on for the bees to consume over winter. Come spring, they'll shake the bees down, put the excluder back in, and away they go again. And that just makes sure that the queen is down in the bottom box before you start your season. You don't want her stuck up above the excluder and laying in your flow frames. Some queens will lay in flow frames and some won't. It seems very queen specific. I've had hives for years with no excluder. If you do want to experiment with that, make sure you check a number of times to make sure she isn't a queen that is going to lay in the flow frames. Thanks for your question.
Great, thanks Cedar. And Fred Dunn's joined us and he's answering lots of questions on YouTube.
Oh, great. Made some great videos that are part of the beekeeper.org. If you want to have a look at that, there's in-depth training made to take you from square one right through to a very in-depth scientific knowledge with beekeepers from all over the world. And it's also a fundraiser for habitat regeneration and protection of our pollinators. So take a look at that if you want to really sink your teeth in and jump ahead with your beekeeping.
Great. Alan's asking, will these for the Flow Hive 2 Plus fit the Flow Hive 2?
Yes, absolutely. You can swap those trays over, so not a bad idea. And we do have those available, I believe, trays.
I think they'll be available soon, so
okay.
That will be great. People can check our websites for that. Alexander's asking, installing a new can May, not quite sure where Alexandra is, just honey in your first season?
Okay, it does depend where you are in the world. So if you're in Australia, the answer would be probably not, because you're coming right into our winter, unless you're in the northern areas, which might get a good nectar flow over the winter time. Springtime's generally when bees are dividing and multiplying. So all regions of the globe, springtime is the fastest activity, but it's not to say in the more temperate climates you can't start at other times of year. And starting with a nuke, you're actually starting with a going little beehive. That's a good way to start, because you've jumped ahead in terms of if it was a package of bees that would be slower because they don't have stores of honey and pollen and brood already. So the next best thing you could do if you really wanted a honey flow would be purchase a already going beehive and simply swap all frames into your bottom box here. You can take the honey frames away and eat them. That way you've got a big colony ready to go, and that will increase your chances of getting a fast result.
Great. Bryn's asking, what do you think of wax dipping the hives?
We have experimented with wax dipping a bit, and if you've got some experience with wax dipping, then do let us know. My experiments weren't so good. We had a couple of issues that happened. One is perhaps the wax was a bit dirty and the finish didn't look that good. The other one was we actually had some issues with the panels changing size due to the extremes of wax dipping, and it made some of the fitments not so good. So perhaps you've got a better experience and can share that. Let us know.
Great. Coogie, who's a regular watcher from southwest Western Australia, is about to put the super on the top of their brood box. Just wondering, they've been doing fortnightly inspections on their brood boxes. Do they need to keep that up once they add the super, or how often should they inspect their brood box?
Look, it really depends. It's fantastic learning. If you are able to get in there and have a look at the bees, you'll be learning a lot faster. But certainly here in Australia, you can go for many months at a time without inspecting your brood box. So you can make up your own mind there. But if you're not inspecting your brood box, then you should at least be keeping an eye on the bee activity, looking in the windows, making sure there's a lot of bees in there, and also checking your tray. Sometimes you might find, if you've got the small hive beetle in your area, for instance, you might find young small hive beetle larvae, and that'll alert you to the fact that the beetles are taking hold, and then you might get in there and inspect and see what's going on and so on. So it sounds like you've had a fantastic start and you're really getting in there and learning, and now you can probably put the super on and move to some more outside observations as you watch them grow.
Great. Bill's asking, does the queen continue to lay eggs in the brood box through winter?
That depends how cold it is. So what happens in the extreme cold areas, the colony will raise what's called fat bees, and they have a little bit more body mass, and they're able to survive a long cold winter. I'm not an expert in the winter because we don't really have one here, and some others might be able to tune in here, but in the extremes of cold they will actually stop laying because they want to reduce the amount of resources they need to feed the larvae. It takes one comb of honey and one comb of brood to feed one comb of honey, one frame of pollen approximately to raise a frame of brood. So that's quite a lot of resources, and if there's nothing coming in, your colony will soon run out. So they're very clever at throttling to what's going on. If they notice there's nothing coming in the door, they will slow down the egg laying, and that way they can survive through the winter time.
Great. Adrian's in California and has had a flow hive that was abandoned, and it's quite cold there at the moment. Just wondering how could they get out? It's quite thick honey in the flow frames, and if they can get it out, do they then need to re-clean them before they put their new package of bees in?
Okay, so sounds like your bees absconded for whatever reason. That's some bad luck there. Getting the honey out, waiting for a warm day might be a good idea. There's a few options you could do here. You could actually choose to just keep the frames in a freezer and put them right onto your colony when they're ready for it, when they're built up and they're ready for a super. Or as you say, you could harvest them, and that can be done on the bench. However, it's a bit harder when the frames are cold. I recommend probably using 2 keys in the top slot and turning them like a butterfly and doing it section by section if you are harvesting the honey frames off the hive. So you could go either way. If you do have freezer space available, that's probably the easiest thing to do. Put them back on the hive when they're ready and away you go.
Great. Megan's in Armidale, where it gets, in Australia, temperatures get down to -15. Just wondering which way she should leave the bottom vent through winter.
Okay, wouldn't be a bad idea to close off ventilation. So if you have a look here, these vents, if you spin that around by undoing these 2 L screws, turning it over and putting it back in, what happens is this area here contacts with the tray and just limits the amount of ventilation that's going up above the tray and under the screen bottom board. Make sure this is pressed all the way in against your tray, and that will be a good thing to do in the winter time and help your bees. The other thing we've just released is the entrance reducer. So that could be another one. At the moment it's in entrance closed position. That wouldn't be a good idea. So we will take that off and turn it over and reduce your entrance size down. It can also be done with some wood or whatever, just to close up the entrance a bit and give less ventilation to your hive, and also helps your colony defend itself from robber bees and other intruders.
Great. Demi's, this sounds pretty exciting. Got their first Flow Hive. It sounds like they're cutting out a colony of bees from their farm shed, and just wondering if you'd suggest filling as many frames in the brood with comb, or should they leave a few empty?
Okay, great question. That's amazing. It's no easy task to do what's called a cutout, and it's definitely a bit more advanced. So do get some help if you're new to beekeeping. My advice with that would be, if you've got the small hive beetle in your area, don't put any honey in the brood box. The small hive beetle will take advantage when everything's a big mess, like it's going to be a bit when you're taking parts of frames out of a wall. You don't want to leave a lot of honey for the hive beetles to lay their larvae in. So just take sections of brood only, and if you've got enough to fill the whole box, then great, go for it. That means there's a big colony. Try and get as many bees as you can in there. Obviously you'll need to get the queen if you want the colony to move into your new box. But the way I would suggest is using the rubber band techniques. So basically grab a brood frame. I'll just take this box off and show you what I mean. And you'll be cutting out sections of brood from that cutout and placing it in here and putting some rubber bands, elastic bands around here and here, just to hold it in place while the bees then will have a chance to connect to the sides and top and hold that brood in place. They'll eventually chew away at those rubber bands and they'll fall to the floor of the hive, and you'll then have a nice frame of brood. So go ahead, but if you've got small hive beetle, make sure you're not taking any honey or pollen. Just the brood is the best recipe I've found.
Great. Jodie's saying, I think I've got this right, that honey's collecting in the round section of the super, so where you put the collection tube. but they haven't turned the key yet. They're just wondering if it's okay or are they doing something wrong?
Some bees will, when they're sealing all the parts, will do a better job than others, and sometimes you will get honey just seeping through the flow frame parts and into that trough area. So what we did to help that was we made what's called a leak back point, and I'll show you what that is right now and what to do about it. So if you have a look at the back of the flow frame here, and you take out one of these little caps, you'll see that where the yellow part meets the clear, there's a little gap, and that's designed so that any remaining honey after harvesting will flow back into the hive for the bees to reuse, and that way you don't have to stand around for hours waiting for the last dribbles of honey to come out into your jar. It also will work to let any dribbles that come through into that trough area, if it is building up, that is a pathway where honey can flow back to the bees. Now, bees will be bees and they'll block up that area. So what you'll need to do is unblock it. Now, if it's been sitting in there a while and you're in a more temperate climate, you'll find that fermentation may occur in that area. Taste the honey. If it tastes like there's fermentation, then rather than letting it go back to the bees, put your tube in and just drain that fermented honey away and discard that. But once it's cleared, the honey that does drip into that area is fine to go back to the bees. So there's a few ways to clear that. One is sometimes just turning this cap around can do it. The other one is this tag here, when you're harvesting, is made to automatically unblock that leak back point when you do your harvesting process. So most of the time you don't have to think about it until they block it up and you see the honey rising in that area. So another thing you can do is get the flow key, the metal harvesting key, and just poke it down in that area, or a stick or a twig or whatever. So you take the cap out, you unblock it and put this back in. Provided the honey's not fermented, it's fine to go back into the hive for the bees to reuse.
I love that, Cedar, that you and Stu thought of that leak back point. That is just awesome. Julie's in the Northern Rivers, so somewhere around near us. Just wondering, is it too late to harvest honey, or when is it too late to harvest honey?
So in the Northern Rivers, if you're on the coastal areas, you can get some good honey flows all through winter. We've got a lot of rain at the moment, so the melaleucas, the paperbarks, will be flowering, and we're expecting some good honey coming in over the winter time. If you're inland a little bit, then it's amazing. Just an hour's drive inland from the coast can mean it's better to leave some honey for the bees over the winter time, because there might not be as much for them to forage on, and then start harvesting again come spring. If you're unsure, the great thing about a flow hive is you can take just one frame or even part of a frame and leave the rest for the bees.
Great. Nazar's just wondering, should they cover their hive during the rain? They've just noticed a few little green points inside the hive, maybe caused by rain or humidity.
Okay, so if you do have the opportunity to keep your hive under cover, then everything will last longer. The woodware, you'll have to do less TLC to keep it looking beautiful and so on. However, they are built to be outside in the rain. If you are having trouble with water coming through your roof, then you might need to give it another coat of paint and really seal up all the cracks in the roof area, or you could even use some silicone as well. And the idea is you want to keep your hive dry if you can.
Great. Alicia's based in Sydney, so saying quite similar to temperature to us. Just in regards to removing the queen excluder during winter, is this a must or optional? And if it's optional, how do you decide if it's the right decision?
What was the location again?
In Sydney, inner city Sydney. So she's saying
Sydney.
similar winters to us.
Yeah. I would say, but ask your local beekeepers, I would say it'd be fine in Sydney. You're close to the coast there. It's a climate that's similar to ours, a little bit cooler, and you should be fine to leave it in this configuration all year round.
Great. Anne's from northeast Victoria, and it can get really cold temperatures in the winter, frost, and then sunny through the day. How do the bees cope with rapid changes of temperature?
The European honeybee, which is the one that humans have dragged all around the world with them because they're such extraordinary pollinators and honey producers, comes from Europe where the temperatures are extreme, and they are incredibly resourceful. They're amazing at air conditioning their hive, whether it be for warm or for cold. In the extreme hot times, they will collect water, they'll use evaporative cooling techniques and fanning to make sure their brood is staying at the perfect temperature. In the cold times, they will disconnect their wing muscles and vibrate to warm the hive, and the honey is their fuel, and they can again keep their brood at the right temperature. So the bees will be fine in the extremes of temperature, whether it be in extremely hot, arid climates to the cold, snowy areas.
Great. With a couple of people just asking, Cedar, the entrance reducer, will it work on just the Flow Hive too, and will customers be able to purchase them separately?
We do have those for you, and I have tried to design it so that it will fit both the Flow Hive 2s and also the classics. If you come around here, I'll show you how that works. These wing screws can screw into any of our hives, and we've got a little instructional video to show you just how to do that. There's a few different holes here which you don't really need to use unless you really want to fasten it down. Perhaps you're doing a show and tell and you want to make sure that there isn't any gaps, and you can then use screws to screw it down even more permanent. If you were to turn that around as a closure, for instance, then you could use these screws and one of these to really screw that down. But you don't really need to think about them if you're using it in a normal outdoor situation. It's just a case of putting your entrance reducer, making sure it's in the right spot, making a little mark. If you've got our Araucaria wood, you'll need to drill a pilot hole. The cedar wood, you can let it self-tap just by screwing it, pressing it firmly and screwing this L screw in, and then you've got a nice entrance reducer which you can remove and put back again simply by turning the L screws like that.
Great. Cedar, Kirk's asking, is about to install a 5-frame nuke. What's the best way to do that to ensure a successful first year?
Okay, so 5-frame nuke, fantastic. That's the best way to start. You're starting with an already going colony that already has a queen, which already has pollen stores, honey stores, and so on. So what you'll need to do is get in your bee suit, get your smoker out, watch our how-to videos. If you're nervous, get some help and install your bees into the brood box, look after them, and they'll grow. And the idea is that you wait till the remaining frames. If you've got this size, which has 8 brood frames, you'll need to add the remaining 3 brood frames. And if there's a good abundance of nectar and pollen, they'll quickly draw the wax on those and start using them readily in their hive, and your colony will be away. If there's not an abundance of nectar and pollen, it could be slow. You might have to be patient. If you find the hive's getting quite light in weight and they're not really storing any honey, then you may need to feed them. In this area, we don't need to feed them pretty much ever, but in other areas, people do feed them at certain times a year in order to speed up that process and in extremes to also keep them alive. If you want to watch a video on installing a nuke, go to our YouTube channel, our Facebook page, or jump on the beekeeper.org where we've got an in-depth training course for you.
Great. On similar kind of thing, Rhonda's asking, she's getting a package of bees, in May and wondering how she puts the package into her flow hive.
So package is basically an artificial swarm. You've got a beekeeper has taken frames out of here and they've shaken all these bees into a little box. And in there they put a queen in a little cage along with about 5 or so escort bees and a tin of syrup for the bees to feed on while they're in the male. It then gets posted. It's in a number of countries that's allowed, and you'll get some odd looks from the post person as they rock up at your door with this buzzing box of bees. And what you'll need to do is get in your bee suit, get out your smoker. If you're new to beekeeping, wear your gloves as well. You'll be shaking those bees into your brood box, putting in the queen in the queen cage, and look after them and they'll grow. Doing that, you can watch us installing.
He's asking, what is the difference between a flow hive and a traditional hive?
Okay, great question. It's a box about this size, and it's usually, it can be made out of any timber, or there's even plastic ones available. And what you have is brood frames in here, which also double as your honey frames. So what you could expect on a conventional Langstroth hive is a box like this. Whoop, did not take that off. We might lose a few. And usually on a baseboard that is, I guess, more usually just a straight flat bottom baseboard without the ventilation and so on, but you'll also find conventional Langstroth hives with baseboards that have ventilation as well, but typically just a simple baseboard, a box, frames like this. Then the next box will have frames like this as well. The bees will do their work making their, storing their honey, drawing their wax. Beekeepers will typically use a plastic foundation or a wax foundation with, if they're using wax foundation, they'll put wires through here, and that will mean that comb will be nice and strong for spinning in a centrifuge. So the big difference is the harvesting process is taking out the frames full with the honeycomb and taking that into a processing area using a hot knife to cut off the capping, putting those frames into a centrifuge, spinning it at great speed to spin all the honey out, repeating the process for the remaining frames, and then taking those frames back to your hive again, which for me, when I was harvesting in that conventional fashion for many years, selling honey to the local shops, I thought there had to be a better way, and that's where the Flow Hive was born, from an idea of can't we just turn a tap and the honey comes out. And eventually we were able to invent that after a decade of my father and I working away, and that's what the flow frames are. So a flow hive is a hive that has flow frames in it. Now we've added more features these days with extra pest management features and things down the bottom here, but basically a hive with our flow frame extracting system could be called a flow hive, and that's the big difference.
Fantastic, Cedar. One of our customers have asked, loves beekeeping but is so terrified of bees but really wants to get into beehives. Any suggestions?
If you're starting out, and bees can be a bit terrifying. You've got a whole box of stinging insects and so on. And the best way to start is if you are feeling a bit nervous, is start getting used to the idea of beekeeping. Watch the videos, have a look at thebeekeeper.org, and then for your first inspections, go and do that with somebody else, whether it be on on an organised bee course or with a friend that keeps bees, and just give yourself a gentle introduction. Make sure you've got a good bee suit and gloves and protect yourself, and just get that sense of what it's like to pull out a frame of brood from the brood box and hold that in your hand and marvel at the amazing world of bees, and you'll probably find that it gets a bit addictive after that.
Cedar, George is asking, have you seen much difference between the 8 and the 10 frame just with one brood box in terms of the swarming propensity in the Flow Hive?
Okay, so the bigger the hive, the more room they've got, and it is one of the triggers of swarming is the amount of room in the hive for the queen to keep laying. So having a bigger hive, whether it be slightly wider like the 10 frame size Langstroth, or that matches up with the Flow 7, then that will be more room, less crowded activity as your colony expands. Adding more boxes is probably the way to go if you're wanting to use that strategy to reduce swarming. You could add another super, or you could add another brood box. And come springtime, just make sure there's some area for the queen to lay. If you open the windows of your hive and you're seeing that there's so many bees inside there that you can hardly see the combs, that may trigger them to start raising queens and start the swarming process, typically in the springtime. If they're crowded at other times of year, they're less likely to swarm, but especially in the springtime. My favourite strategy is to take splits and keep the hives a bit smaller. That works for me in this region. However, in the colder regions, people tend to run the bigger size hives. The 10 frame Langstroths matches with the Flow frame 7, and they also tend to stack another brood box or super on as well. And that just gives a bit more room when the whole nectar season is compressed into a short amount of time, where everything's flowering at once, and it gives room for the bees to really build up like they want to when there's a lot of forage around.
Great. Tiz is in New South Wales and successfully caught a swarm, and they have them in a nuke box. They're slowly building their comb. Just wondering, should they leave them in the nuke box until it's really full, or should they just move it into the brood box now before it gets sort of into winter and really cold days?
Okay, good question, and well done for catching the swarm. That's a great adventurous way to start your beekeeping. Now, I think you might be better off at this time of year moving them into your brood box. Reason being is the nuke boxes don't tend to have a lot of insulation, so it'll just be a little bit easier for them if you move them into the brood box. Now, having said that, if they're a really small, slow swarm, you can also get a half-size box at a general beekeeping supplies that has more insulation than a nuke box that typically is just a core flute. Now, if you've already got one of those boxes, you could leave them and let them fill all of the frames in the nuke box first. If it is the core flute kind of material that the nuke box is made out of, then I'd recommend transferring to either one of these 8 frame size boxes or a 5 frame nuke box that's built of wood or something more insulating.
Great. Belinda's just saying she's got the super. She's found a little bit of mould on the inside of her inner cover towards the super. Is there anything you can do to prevent this? Is it an issue?
Okay. It is a very wet time of year here, and well done for getting in there and having a look. If you've that typically may happen when there's not a whole lot of bees servicing the super area. So if this area is largely left vacant, then the bees won't be getting around looking after all the surfaces. If that's the case and you find this is empty and there's not much going on, then I'd recommend removing the super and then putting the inner cover directly on top of your brood box, so it can be maintained by the bees.
Great. Paul, we're getting all the Australian winter questions now. So Paul's in southeast Melbourne. The bees are going really well, foraging, waxing up the super. Just wondering, should they take the super off for winter? But if they decide to leave it, what could go wrong?
Okay, good question. My sister keeps bees down in that area too, and she's been sending me some beautiful jars of honey as well. So the main thing you'll need to be thinking about is the queen excluder, which we have just removed from this hive. The queen excluder goes between these two boxes, and at the very least you should remove the queen excluder for winter. Some people also choose to remove the flow super for winter, and that is a choice that you might want to ask around the local beekeepers, whether to downsize your hive over the winter or let them use the remaining stores in the flow frames over the winter. But either way, remove the queen excluder and make sure you're putting that back again in the springtime. Some queens will lay eggs in the flow super. So if you are experimenting without the queen excluder come springtime, then you'll need to check the frames, the flow frames, and make sure the queen isn't using them for laying brood.
Great. Destiny's in southern United States. Just wondering, Cedar, what flower plants do you prefer for the flavour in your honey?
Okay, my favourite thing is to have a diversity. I love this honey, not because it's my most favourite flavour to have on my porridge every morning, but it's just so floral and it's such a burst. And if you're tasting this flavour against this darker one, then this one will be more malty and this one will be more, how do I describe it? It's like a floral burst in your mouth. So my favourite thing is to have multiple of different flavours. And the great thing is that I'm still tasting new and different honeys. There's as many different types of honey as there are nectar producing flowers in the world. So in your area you'll get beautiful different honeys that are very unique to your area, most likely. In urban areas you also get beautiful honey from the things that people plant in their gardens, and also quite a long extended season because of the variety of plants. The ironbark here is one of my favourites. It's a very classic Australian eucalypt flavour. This one here has actually the this one is the wild quince, or also gets called crow's ash, which is a very floral one. Some people don't like it because it's too intense, but I like it just for the difference in flavours. There's other flavours that I really like. The tuckaroo is it's a bit like a lolly shop. It's such an incredible texture, and that flowers in the springtime in our area as well. So and there's some flavours that I don't like as well. There's one called possum piss honey, which is the if anyone's ever had a possum living in the ceiling, they'll know what I mean when they smell this honey. And funnily enough, we actually have 2 possums living in this ceiling, which Trace might be a bit concerned about coming from New Zealand. But there's that flavour is the red ash flower in this area, and it's very strong and it's not so desirable. If it's mixed with other honeys in a very small amount, it can be quite nice, but it's very overpowering. But I love having that as well, because you can say, taste this, taste this, taste this, and people just are really wowed out by the honey, and it's a beautiful experience to share that, and also the conversations that come up around tasting the honey are amazing.
Oh, yum, I feel like honey on toast now. Cedar, Kurt's asking, been away for a few weeks, lives in Western Australia, said the Maori flow has begun here. I might be saying that wrong, and it's M-A-R-R-I, must be some form of tree or something. Anyway, due to do an inspection and as a learner, just wondering, should they just inspect the brood box or go the whole hive inspection, as they haven't been there for 3 weeks?
So generally when you're doing your inspections, you're inspecting the brood. You don't need to inspect the honey frames unless you want to really learn and see what's going on. So it's a matter of removing this top box, get some help if it's nice and full and heavy, and then you can have a look and see what's going on in the bottom box here. You might want to have a look at the beekeeper.org, do some training, do some reading so you know what you're looking at, or get a friend that's been into beekeeping for a while already and can help you with that first brood inspection so you know what to look for.
Great. Anne is just saying, so they've just requeened their hive due to the aggressive bees. Checked them about 10 days ago and the queen was out of the cage and found near the cage and seemed really happy. But because she had a lot of buzzing bees around her, she closed up the brood box without searching for fresh eggs. Is it enough to spot the new queen, or should I go in now and again to look for new eggs in the brood?
Wow, some fantastic beekeeping there, well done. So if you've spotted the queen in there, that's most likely you're good to go. Sometimes it's hard to spot the queen, so you are looking for signs that she's there, the bee eggs down the cells, the young larvae. However, on a very rare occasion, you can get a queen that's not laying. So if you really want to be sure, jump back in there in another few weeks' time, have a look and see if there's any eggs or young larvae, and that's a definite that you're good. But if you don't have time to do that, then there's a very, very good chance that you're fine if the queen's happy in the hive and you've seen her.
Great, getting some great questions coming in today. Sue's asking, the brood box is looking all full, lots of brood and comb and honey, but not moving so much into the flow frames. But just wondering, is it due to the cold or wet weather? Should they smear some wax on it or maybe just leave it?
Generally what I do is leave it and wait till the bees are ready to build up, and what happens is when the bees fill this box and you open the windows and you can see a lot of bees in there, and that coincides with a good nectar flow, which is usually why they're building up. There's a good nectar flow, then you'll get the bees doing their work on the flow frames and storing the honey. It's up to you. If you're getting a bit impatient, you might like to scrape some burr comb off the top of the frames. Typically, if your hive is ready to put the super on, then you'll be getting a bit of build up on top of here with some burr comb. You can scrape that off with your hive tool, add a bit of smoke to get the bees out of the way as you scrape that. And then with your hive tool, you can just mash that wax into the surface of the flow frame. You won't break them, and do it in the window area where you can enjoy watching them recycle that wax. But again, it's not necessary. Some patience will get you there.
Great. Bonnie's asking, but I think it's just more a little bit of confusion, thinking that why the roof on the hive that you're looking at there, Cedar, has a flat roof, whereas they can see the one in the background has our beautiful pitched roof.
So this is the inner cover, which adds a bit of insulation and also provides the spacing above the flow frame, so you're less likely to get build up on top of them connecting to the lid. So you need some sort of inner cover, and then our gabled roof goes on top of that like this. So it slides right over and down like that, and then there's these little wing screws on the side. Cyclonic weather will help hold your roof on. Generally you don't need to use those wing screws, but if you've got a strong wind warning or you live in a particularly windy area, you could screw them in to hold your roof on.
Great. Cedar, when you do a split, do you re-queen or let the colony raise the queen after the split, or do you take the queen with the new split?
Okay, so you can go either way with that one. If you're allowing them to raise their own queen, then you just need to make sure there's eggs down some cells in both the parent colony and the one you split. So you may even decide not to bother looking for the queen in that case, as long as both of them have the resources, being young eggs to raise a queen from. The chances are that the one without the queen will go and raise a new queen. If you're introducing a queen, you will need to find which box has the queen in it so that you can introduce it to the one without. Then there's all sorts of different techniques on splits, but what I tend to do is just put the split right beside the parent hive, and I'll typically move the parent hive over a bit to give the smaller or weaker colony the lion's share of the bees returning home. And that way you're giving the weaker colony a bit of a head start.
Great. Now, Cedar, I've got to ask, there's so many people are mentioning the wall behind you and wanting to know what it is and how you've done it. And they want the story of the brood wall behind you.
Okay, so this is all sorts of old hives. This box here was from a hive that I purchased off a beekeeper 20 years ago. Here's some of the first designs we had for making our Flow Hives before we moved on to the more fancy versions. There's all sorts of different examples here that were lying around, and we thought, why not put them on the wall? It'll add a nice backdrop for making videos, and also just a nice feature in our boardroom, adding a bit of character here to the wall.
It's kind of like our Flow Hive museum. Fantastic. Great. Juliana's asking, Cedar, they've got some water containers around for the bees with stones in them, but just finding a few dead bees in it. Is there anything they should do to make it a little bit safer for them?
So the stones are a great idea. It gives them somewhere to stand. So bees will tend to prefer to suck on wet sand or stones as you have it, rather than just be drinking at the edge of the pool, because they can get accidentally immersed in that environment. It's normal to see bees at the end of their life around water, simply because at the end of a short life of a bee, 4 to 6 weeks or so, if it's foraging season, then you'll find that collecting water is one of the last jobs they do. So you'll find bees tattered and worn out beside the water's edge, and taking their last jobs on as they finish their short life as a forager. So I wouldn't be too concerned about some bees dying by the water.
Great, Cedar. And just on the new ant caps, or ant guards, I think I'm supposed to call them, what do you put in them?
So this one here, we were making a little video. We already have filled that up with some oil. So cooking oil is probably one of the easier things to use. It doesn't evaporate like water does. If you use water, you'll have to be topping it up every other day. Whereas if you use a cooking oil, then it'll stay in there for much longer. You can also use grease, like a white Vaseline, and we've included an area on the underside here to add some grease as well, if you want to increase the ant barrier. If you're having real trouble with ants still getting onto your hive, you can add some grease underneath here as well. And that way the bees, the ants will find it hard to get up onto your leg. You'll need to remove the foliage from touching your hive. If your hive's out in the garden, or there's a lot of grass and it's touching your hive, then the ant guards won't help much. So remove the foliage, a bit of cooking oil in there, raise the lid if you've got problems with larger ants stepping over, or screw it down lower if you just have all ants. And that seems to work quite nicely.
Great. Cedar, what are the difference between the ant caps for the Flow Hive 2 Plus and the Flow Hive 2?
So the difference is the bolt size. So with the Flow Hive 2 Plus, we've gone to this cast aluminium. While we're at it, we upsized the bolt and moved it out further to the corner for increased stability. We didn't really have reports of hives falling over due to the size of the bolts at all, but we thought it just looks more stable and feels more sturdy, so we upsized that. So that means we've had to go and make injection molds for the smaller size bolt as well, because we knew you'd ask and want some ant caps for your hive. Ant guards.
Yeah, exactly. Hugh's asking, in Southeast Georgia in the USA, bought a Flow Hive in 2017. Just wondering, there's a bit of propolis in them. Do they need to clean them before they put them back into the hive for this season?
If they're really grimy, then you might want to give them a hot water wash. Shake the water out, or maybe do that when the frames are set to the open position. Dry them out. Make sure the frames are in the closed position so the cells are formed. Give them back to the bees and they'll look after them from there. Mostly you can just put them straight back in unless they've got mould or things like that, and the bees will get in there and start the process of covering them in wax and making them ready for storing the honey. So generally let the bees do the work where you can, but up to you, depends, maybe vermin's got into them and they need a bit of a clean. But if they've been stored in a nice cold environment or in a chest freezer, then they should be ready to go back on as they are. Just have a look, make sure your cells are in the form position. The best spot to look at that is along the bottom edge of the frame, where you can clearly see whether the parts are in their correct position. If you're unsure, just put the key in the top slot and turn it and make sure those parts are pushed into the cell-formed position.
Great. Cedar, James is just wondering, what do you think the best model would be for the northern climates of Canada? And would they need extra insulation?
So for the colder climates, the larger size hive seems to be more popular. It not only suits what people normally do in that area with the 10 frame size Langstroth, which takes 7 of our flow frames. It also just stores a bit more honey in the box, and also potentially they'll store a bit of honey on the edges of the brood as well, which means that you've got just a bit more stores for winter and also a bigger area for your colony to expand in the springtime. When there's that real abundance of nectar hits in those colder climates, then your bees will be expanding very quickly and wanting a bit of a larger hive. So I would go for our Flow Hive 7 in that case, in the colder areas. As far as insulation goes, some people tend to put some insulation under the lid during the winter time. You can use an old polystyrene box and put some insulation on top of here, an extra added layer. There's other things you could use also, but some kind of insulation which just limits the amount of condensation that might form on the underside of the inner cover. It's okay for condensation to be really forming on the inner walls of the beehive. Many say that that's actually a good thing because the bees can use that as a water source. But you don't want it dripping from the roof, wetting your bees, and that's the reason why adding a bit of insulation on top is a good idea. It's a controversial topic. Some people believe that you should really wrap your hive up for the winter, and in the end try and see what works for you. If you want to add a complete insulation wrap, then have a look at how other people do it and follow suit. I'm no expert when it comes to snow and beehives and whatnot. Fred Dunn is on the thread. He's got some great training videos. He's also made some great contributions to the beekeeper.org, which is an online bee course which is very in-depth, experts from all around the world, and is also a fundraiser for our bees, for habitat regeneration and protection of our pollinators. So go and have a look there if you want some more in-depth training material. Thank you so much for all your questions, and let us know what you'd like us to tune in on next week, and hopefully we'll have